restrict myself to the legislator, as he has the main responsibility whether the democratic constitutional state will maintain law and order or not. The requirement for the legislator to write in a short and understandable way should not only apply to the Constitution, but also to all laws and regulations which the normal citizen has to face in the course of his life. If on the one hand the state expects the citizen to know the Constitution and the laws, it is the duty of the state, on the other hand, to inform the citizen as well as possible about the Constitution and the laws which are in force. Nowadays, children in school have to learn many different things, where opinions might differ about their use. Should it not be the task of the state to ensure that during compulsory schooling these schools should also teach law? Should not the state give each citizen a compendium of laws which contains the Constitution and the most important laws, together with a commentary, so that the citizen can find his way in the constitutional state and know about his rights and duties? Of course, there are a large number of laws and regulations which the citizen does not have to know in his normal life, but which are nevertheless necessary, for instance, to protect the consumer and the environment against products which are harmful. These regulations are aimed at companies of the industrial, the agricultural and the service sector. The large number of regulations is a burden especially for small companies. At the same time, those small companies are extremely important for employment and innovation in a national economy. Besides high taxation, complicated tax and social laws, as well as regulations which change all the time, are an important reason why small companies are not set up in the first place or fail soon afterwards. Since the public authorities of the state or community level receive from the companies direct and indirect taxes, duties, social security contribution, etc., it should be the legal duty of these authorities to advise the companies on those matters more or less free of charge. If the regulations are contradictory, those regulations have to be applied which are in favor of the taxpayer and the companies. If the state issues laws which are unclear or contradictory, the state should be liable and not the taxpayer. As important a parliament and the representative democracy or indirect democracy is, even more important, in my opinion, for the democratic constitutional state will be direct democracy in this third millennium. Politicians and parties are often quite skeptical towards direct democracy, which is not surprising if one takes into account that it reduces their power. This is perhaps the reason why direct democracy, with the exception of Switzerland and Liechtenstein, is only possible in a very limited form, if at all. If one compares the decisions taken by the parliaments in Switzerland and Liechtenstein with the decisions taken by the people on the same subject soon afterwards, there can be a substantial difference. I just want to mention two examples from Liechtenstein. Only 20 years ago, government and parliament decided unanimously to introduce a new tax law. The new tax law was rather complicated, but it reduced taxation for about 80% of the population. 10% would pay about the same amount, and the 10% richest people would pay higher taxes. The party thought it would be a very popular proposition. The people in Liechtenstein collected enough signatures to put the new tax law to a popular vote, where it was rejected by about 80% of the voters because they thought it would reduce the competitive advantage of the Liechtenstein economy, an argument which I shared. Another example is the membership of Liechtenstein in the European Economic Area. The European Economic Area consists of the European Union, Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein. Various interests, especially in our financial sector, were against it because it opened protected sections of the Liechtenstein market to European competition. Government and Parliament were also against membership. I was in favor, and we finally agreed to put it on a popular vote. The people voted in favor, and now the membership in the European Economic Area has not only the support of a vast majority of the population, but also of the government and the parliament. The main arguments against direct democracy have been that people might vote for law which discriminates against minorities or is not in the long-term interest of the people. In Liechtenstein, the reigning prince has a veto power which he can use against such laws or changes of the constitution, with the exception if the majority of the voters decides to abolish the monarchy. Another important duty, besides law and order, is the education system. If one takes into account that a modern economy and a modern state cannot be run by illiterate people, state authorities have to concern themselves with the education of their population. In our modern world, an illiterate person is very much handicapped, and for such a person it is nearly impossible to find a well-paid job. Nevertheless, one can well ask the question whether it is one of the main responsibilities of the state to run the whole education system in the future. There are good reasons either to privatize the whole educational system or to delegate it to the local communities. To manage and to own the educational system from kindergarten to university will be the task of private business, local communities, associations of local communities, or joint venture between private business and individual local communities. The financing of the education system should be done through a voucher system with the children or the parents of the children as beneficiaries. The philosophy behind an educational system financed through vouchers is the following. The public authorities, be they the central or local government, finance today the whole educational system through direct subsidies from kindergarten to university. Instead of using the taxpayers' money to finance the education system, it is much better to subsidize the parents or the students so that they can themselves choose the school which in their opinion is the best for them. Well-managed schools which are able to meet the expectations of the parents and the students will be successful, and the others will have to adapt or they will disappear from the market. In order to prevent abuse by parents and schools, the subsidies for the parents and the students should not be paid out in cash, but rather in vouchers, which are redeemed in those schools which fulfill a minimum standard. Parents should only be allowed to cash in those vouchers if they make a commitment towards the state that they will educate their children themselves or privately. Already today, in a number of states releases children from compulsory school attendance if it can be proven that the children will receive an education equal to that provided in a publicly maintained school. Schools, like other institutions managed and owned by the public authorities, tend to become bureaucratic and inefficient sooner or later. Politicians are reluctant to dismiss headmasters or teachers who are no longer able to fulfill their task. In many cases, a dismissal is very difficult and, according to the law in a number of states, only possible after long and public court proceedings. Politically influential teachers' unions are a further obstacle to an efficient school system, because the welfare of the teacher is in their eyes, of course, more important than the welfare of the students. The political resistance against voucher systems is usually organized by those powerful teachers' unions. The fact that parents and students are willing to pay substantial amounts of money to finance education in private schools and universities, which are usually far more expensive than the public educational system, shows that in many cases the public educational system, from kindergarten to university, does not meet the expectation of parents and children. Nevertheless, despite their financial sacrifices, the state forces those people to finance with their tax an inefficient school system which they do not want to use. But only a rich parent can afford that. The state should and will continue to play an important role in a voucher system, but a role which will support social justice in society and not hinder it, in contrast to the educational system of today. The legal framework set by the state through law or decree will have to clarify a number of questions, like the minimum value of a voucher, how long parents or students are legally entitled to a voucher, what are the minimum standards for schools which may redeem vouchers, as well as a number of other questions. A state whose tasks are basically reduced to foreign policy, the maintenance of law and order, and the financing of the education system will have to reconsider fundamentally public finances. At the level of the communities or associations of communities, new tasks have to be dealt with, which have to be carried out and financed mainly locally. There's much to be said for leaving indirect taxation to the state, with the local communities obtaining authority for all direct taxation. Compared to direct taxation, it is much easier to raise indirect taxes. Much can be automated, and the state needs only few civil servants for this task. A centralized administration for indirect taxation would be the most practical solution, even if the tax authority would lie with the local communities. For this reason, the authority to raise indirect taxes should lie with the state, and the authority to raise direct taxes with the local communities. There have been a number of publications and discussions about the rate of indirect taxation, as for instance the value-added tax. More important than the level of the tax rate seems to be that the rate should be uniform. Nevertheless, politicians love to choose different levels of tax rate, with the surprising justification